Welcome, everyone. Happy Valentine's Day. I'm Ann Mason, a member of the program committee for the DC chapter of the National Railway Historic Society, and I'm your host for tonight's presentation. I'll be assisted by Garen Goldsmith and Jim Perry. Tonight, we're going to have all of the questions in the chat, and then we'll have a question session at the end of George's talk. The DC chapter has a number of activities in which we do to fulfill our public education mission. We have a railroad museum at the Martin O'Rourke Memorial Railroad at Bowie Tower. We have a monthly newsletter called The Timetable. We sponsor a rail camp youth, and then we maintain and preserve our beloved Dover Harbor, the 1923 Pullman car. So today we are going to have a wonderful presentation by George Gula, and I am stopping my share so that George can get started. George is going to tell us a little bit about himself as we get started. So over to you, George.
Well, that's true. I was born in Scranton, and if anybody takes a look at my background later, you'll see in the background the building that's shown in the office, the old Dixon Manufacturing. For you railroaders, they made mine locomotives and other railroad equipment. When I was in Philadelphia, when I was aged 5 to about 6 or 7, my dad worked down there. So the streetcars were right in front of me, and I really got into the trolleys and came back to Scranton. Could not understand why nobody liked these things, but graduated high school, obviously Penn State, with a degree in business logistics, transportation, and came out to Pittsburgh to work for the Port Authority of Allegheny County. Was the name of the public transit system at that time. I retired in 2009, but general manager who hired me was a member of the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, and I'm still very active there. I operate cars. I'm a docent, very active in the archives, and I do a lot of public programs, as we're going to see. So we can get started. And what do I need to do? I'm seeing my slideshow up here, but do I need to stop share and then?
Nope, you're all set. It's we see your slides on the
Okay.
screen, but we also see your
Yeah,
thumbnails on the end. Perfect. Thank
I
you so
got rid of
much.
I got rid of
Over
it.
to you, George.
Okay, so you can see what I'm doing, right? Good. Well, this show really started off one year at the Trolley Museum. We had Armed Forces Day, and people were down there. They even had a tank down there, some jeeps and reenactors, and we had opened up at that point the new visitor center. We have a bigger one now, and it was air conditioned. Somebody said, we're doing this in July. Why don't you do a program so people could come in and do something on the World War II, on trolleys in World War II. And I, was thinking, well, oh, gee whiz, well, they ran, right? They just ran. But, I discovered quite a bit. And we're going to go on. A lot of people and publications go into making these programs. I can't do it alone. Certainly wasn't there to take any of the pictures. So some of those names may be familiar to some of you. And we'll start with, and I know it's a myth, Richmond is supposed to have the first system. They opened it up in 1887, and they put it on a horse car line. Scranton, Pennsylvania operated the first electric trolley, the first system built for commercial operation, and they ran on November 29th, 1886. This was the test trip. On the 30th, after they debugged it a bit, people coming out of the Lyceum Theater in Scranton, they had heard about the Stanley Livingston. Dr. Stanley had been talking about his safari in Africa, where he did find Dr. Livingston. They were the first ones on a regular car. And you notice up on top of that wire, it's what's known as a troller. It's a little wagon kind of affair that rides on top of the wire. That didn't last very long. It kept falling off. Took two men to put it back on. Within the first 3 months, the master mechanic said there were 31 holes in the roof. Uh, Now we'll move all the way up from 1886. It's 1918. It's 32 years after the very first electric car ran. And in Pennsylvania, the trolley operations are going to peak. We had 116 systems at that time. Second amount in miles of track. That was 4,600 in the nation. So if you look at that map, certainly you'll assume, yep, Philadelphia down on the right. There's the Pittsburgh area down on the left. You would expect cities like Lancaster and Harrisburg would be connected, but take a look in the center of the state, way up on the top, and streetcar lines ran even then. Now you have World War One, and of course, World War One ushered in tremendous costs for all industries, including the transit industry, and the cost overruns would continue. Of course, the companies would want fare increases. The local governments and lots of citizens resisted that. When they did get fare increases, usually wasn't enough. Now you have after World War II or World War One, we're going to find a couple of things happening. All three levels of government pave roads. They make them much better. And the electric starter is invented, and that's placed on automobiles. That replaces very dangerous crank start. Anybody ever watching an airplane propeller start? Well, that could really take your arm off with that crank. But one big thing, too, that allowed people to buy cars was the introduction in the 20s of credit. And so people start leaving public transit. We start seeing abandonments of trolley systems as early as 1919. You know, by 1930, half of all the roads in Pennsylvania are paved. We have in 1920, 500,000 autos and trucks are sold. That's one for every four families. 1,500,000 autos sold in 1930. So now it's three for every four families. Now, Mount Lebanon is where I live, and I belong to their historical society. And I discovered in 1930 that, and it was at least a more affluent community than it is now. Still very nice. But in 1930, over 500 families owned two cars, not just one, but two. This was typical Pennsylvania before all that road paving. And it was a decidedly rural state for the most part. And you're looking at Lancaster cars, this typical Pennsylvania road. This could be Route 22. This was what a major road was like. We're looking at 1936. These are cars from the Lancaster system. Here's the Lehigh Valley Transit car. You have these rising automobile uh, number of automobiles, and look at this car from one side of the road to the other. And typically, what would happen is these lines went on the side of the road. They had to dicker with property owners. If the property owner on that side said, "Nope, you can't come on my property," they might get a deal from the guy on the other side, and you would have this crisscross from one side to the other. This Lehigh Valley Transit car around Easton. This is out in Pittsburgh, somewhere on Boulevard, which today is a four-lane road. It's horrible. But this is an example of the government financed roads. This is the top. That's what it was. The bottom was pretty good, a two-lane concrete road, which is now a four-lane road. And this would go all over. This was north of Pittsburgh. They built this out of nothing and helped put a trolley line out of business here. Four-lane road. This was happening. In this case, the county and the state did this. And this, of course, resulted in lost fares. And you have systems that look like this. These are cars probably put in before World War One, and they are now in financial difficulties. They're losing ridership. They really need to replace the equipment. This is out in Duquesne, near Pittsburgh, one of the big steel towns that we had. They can't replace the equipment. This probably was a car put in about 1900, if it's not older. And we're looking at 1928 when the line ceases totally to exist. So here's the 1930 map. And if you paid attention to the last one, you'll notice there is some stuff missing, particularly up in the north, although Warren and Erie still have car lines. And they're losing more within the middle of the state. It's only 12 years um, since that 1918, 1919. The rural lines are disappearing. This is Hershey, and we're looking at the town of Hummelstown. So that is the Hershey system. We're west of Hershey. Under that arch was where the Harrisburg cars came in, and you could change cars, not uncommon in the state. Um, but this was really America at that point. Church socials, picnics, amusement parks. You know, if you wanted entertainment, you went to a ball game, or you listened to the radio, or you went to the movies. And no internet, no Facebook, no Twitter, none of that. And this was out in the Reading area. Look at those old cars. Pretty cruddy road. And over half the Americans at this point are living on farms or they're living in small towns, and general stores are where you go to shop. The houses might have picket fences. This one does not. Sorry, you used ice boxes. Your phone was on the wall, a hand crank phone, probably a party line. Um, but this was typical of America. Here's Washington, PA, not very far from the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum. We have track that was once part of the line that ran between Pittsburgh and Washington. This is where most Americans would shop in a little downtown like this. In a smaller area, they might go to a neighborhood or a general store. And here you are in the late 30s, and pedestrians and autos are just battling the streetcars for space, certainly delaying it because its schedules are being messed up by all of this congestion on the streets. Downtown Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, this is downtown Pittsburgh. They really had big shopping districts. Downtown Pittsburgh had alone 6 department stores. And another one was just on the other side of the Allegheny River. This is Liberty Avenue. And we're looking at cars that were built between 1914 and as late as 1927. Here's my hometown of Scranton. Ed Miller was a prolific photographer, and he took a shot here. And if you look at the top of that hill, well, I wish he had waited up there because that's where my street is. But this was a typical neighborhood where people lived. They would come to the downtowns. It's Railroad Avenue at 4th, about 1941, right before the line was abandoned. At this time, you could buy a DeSoto for $701, which we figured out to be about 8 1/3 years of fares on a streetcar. But gas was only $19 a gallon. And still, you don't see very many cars at this point parked along the streets. A little farther south, Wilkes-Barre, just to show you another typical neighborhood. This is 1938. The car is heading inbound to downtown Wilkes-Barre, which actually would have trackless trolleys. I found this location when I was in Wilkes-Barre. This is a peaceful Sunday, a day of rest. And certainly these people are doing that. I suspect the 2 people behind the pole may have just gotten off a streetcar. I'm looking at these 2 guys, though, hanging out. Kind of something I might do. I was be doing in the late 50s, the early 60s. And we're looking at 1939. Now, 1941 is when Pearl Harbor is going to happen. And by 1942, would these people be drafted? And I often look at pictures and wonder, did they survive the war? This was the cars being produced in Pittsburgh beginning in 1914. We're on Brownsville Road. And, this car, when this picture was taken in 1927, is already about 15 years to 20 years old. That's about the time you want to replace the car, but they're going to continue to run in Pittsburgh until 1954. Take a look at the gas pump over on the right. And these were all over Pittsburgh. I've seen pictures of them in Philadelphia. Apparently, any of you could install a gasoline tank and go out and pump gas. I even saw a picture once in Philadelphia outside, and I hope the guy washed his hands outside an optometrist's office. So was he looking at your eyes, fitting your glasses, and then going out to put gasoline in somebody else's car? This is the only non-Pennsylvania picture, but it's important because in 1929, the industry began the development of what would be known as the PCC car. A group of street railway presidents decided they needed a new car. PCC stands for President's Conference Committee, so they named the car after that group. And 100 cars were ordered by the Brooklyn and Queens Company, and the enter service in October of 1936. And that's what we're looking at. Each car cost about $14,500 at a time when the average person earned about $25 a week. On the other hand, they paid no income taxes, and a nickel was what the fare was in New York. However, all of the companies, a lot of the companies, the bigger companies, Philadelphia was an exception, pitched in to develop this car. They work with the builders. They provided their own staffs in trying to come up with the perfect car. Pittsburgh, because of its topography, it was a very difficult place to run a system, and they were hoping this faster car would shrink the operating costs that were occurring in the city. Because they put so much time and money into the car working with that PCC group, they got the first one in July of 1936. And this car was demonstrated here. You're looking at Mount Lebanon. You're about 7 blocks from where I live here. And not only was it demonstrated here, it was sent to a number of the more affluent communities to show people if you came back to transit or if you continue to ride, this is what you would ride. Here's the first fleet. They came in 1937. And these would be supplemented in rush hour by the old stuff, which would run throughout the war and in many cases after the war. This was Philadelphia's brand new car, and I could just see the kid asking his dad, "Hey, we don't want to ride this automobile. Let's go and get on that new streetcar." They were assigned to Wayne Avenue, where an awful lot of stockholders lived, apparently. Broad Street, pardon me, that's City Hall over on the left. And we're just south of City Hall on Broad Street. And the new cars are coming, and it'd be about 6,000 of them eventually. But most people consider the trolleys old. They were old fashioned. We wanted to drive. And buses were also showing up. And notice in Philadelphia, they're double deck buses to try to carry out the crowds. This is a typical road in Pittsburgh. This is what is known as our strip district. And traffic isn't as bad as it was apparently here in the middle 30s, but this is what traffic does. Can you imagine the streetcar up there between the poles trying to make time, get into town on schedule, and get people in both directions to their destinations? 1939. Now, compared to that 1930 map, we're really just running streetcars in the bigger towns and in a number of these towns, Scranton, Altoona, Wilkes-Barre, they were hoping to eliminate streetcars by around 1942. And that was some of the letters that I've seen from these companies and information within the state. Between 39 and the end of 1941, we're going to lose more streetcars up in Sharon and up in Newcastle and up in Butler and up in Tarentum. These are all over on the left side of your map. Altoona will retain them. And I don't know what this little thing is, but it looks like it's at Shamokin. And we're going to lose the York system down here on the bottom. So Elizabethtown, some of Hershey will continue to run. These were just going to buses, and they would have celebrations. There's Harrisburg car, the last car. And there were a lot of buses at this time. At this point, they were not gasoline bus, or I'm sorry, they were not diesel buses. They were gasoline buses. They did smell. Most of them were small, and in many cases, they could not carry the load of a streetcar. In this case, what you had here in Philadelphia was Route 55. It was cut back to the city limits. It would run during the day, and buses would provide service to the outlying portions, in this case, to Willow Grove Park. In some cases, buses provided service all day, supplemented in the rush hours by streetcars. We don't have these mills anymore in Pittsburgh, but there were car tracks on that, and on that street. And we had seen tensions in Europe as early as 1933, when the rise of Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini, and certainly in the Pacific. We also saw the Japanese becoming very militaristic, and nobody wanted to get in a war. Hey, the Depression's ending. We're getting called back to work, because everybody is turning to the neutral United States to buy their war materials, to get their fuel, to get food, because they're already getting ready or are in the war. By 1940, we're making $600 million in armaments for other country. This was known as the Ward in Homestead. And that is the Homestead Mill in the back where the famous Homestead strike took place. And the government basically cleared all these people out, about half of the 19,000 people living down here, so that that mill could expand. And as such, during the war, it produced a lot of armor plate for trucks, for tanks, and for ships. Now, these cars are sitting in Philadelphia, very, very lonely because they've been out of service for much of the 30s. Four motor cars, certainly more expensive to operate. And when this happened, when the Depression happened, they took cars out of service. They got rid of operators and other employees. And by the time the mid to late 30s are coming, even the storage barns, as you see here, are a cost that could be eliminated. And so the companies got rid of a lot of streetcars that would be needed in just a few years. Because, as we all know, this is December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attack. It was supposed to be occurring right after a declaration of war. It became a sneak attack. And all of a sudden, the government begins mobilizing. They had, after World War One, there was so much government failure. They had held a lot of hearings to decide what to do if another conflict came. And this would all very much work out. These government agencies would go ahead and start, putting into practice the plans that they had come up with, including transportation plants. And they quickly were converting factories that used to produce nylons and other goods into war production. And there would be a lot of consumer goods that would be missing for the war. And there's a number for you: 242 tanks for the Army in 1940, 1942, 24,000. Certainly, victory gardens were encouraged, and people would be producing about 40% of their own food. But things started to be rationed very, very quickly. And one thing that will be rationed, and you can see meat rationing, food rationing here, but gasoline is going to be rationed. Prices would be frozen in May 1942 on just about everything. And military goods, military material was considered a primary production effort. Rubber, anything with rubber, all of a sudden it was a shortage. And I apologize if anybody is offended by the caricature in this 1941, 42, I think November of 42 picture of a Japanese soldier, but they held 90% of the rubber. They had taken the Dutch East Indies in 1940 and 41. And you can see on the right, we're trying to tell everybody, look what's going to happen if you don't conserve your tires. There were rubber drives for hoses and bathing caps and tires. In fact, you were allowed to keep 5 tires, 4 in your car and 1 spare. There's the Office of Defense Transportation, and it was created by Roosevelt in 1941. And they were coordinating all types of transportation, and they would take over public transportation as well. And this meant that if Pittsburgh had ordered 100 new PCCs, they would only get 66. The Office of Defense Transportation moved other cars to other areas they felt needed those cars. And if there were buses out there that had just taken over a streetcar line, many times the trolleys were ordered back. Oh, yeah. Who does 35 miles an hour today? Who wants to do 35 miles an hour? But that was the national speed limit. They thought that the voluntary rationing was ineffective, and they mandated, particularly on the East Coast. There was no pipeline yet from the oil fields in the areas around Texas to the East Coast. There were German submarines sinking ships off the East Coast. And so 17 eastern states in May of 1942 get a 35 mile an hour a mile an hour rather speed, and you start getting various types of gas rationing. The following year, 43, they banned pleasure driving, and retreads were common on the tires. Now, there were stickers that you got for gas rationing. Here's an actual gas rationing car. It's an A sticker. Your wife might get that. 4 gallons a week because you had non-essential auto use. Maybe you had to go to a doctor. Maybe you had to go to the store. But they had for a year the prohibition of non-essential driving. So they would go through the parking lots of ball fields and parks and country clubs, and they would take down your license number, and you would be fined. If you were a war worker, you got 8 gallons a week because they figured, well, you got to drive, to the various war industries. There were people who were considered very important: doctors, priests, ministers, mail carriers, people going to work on the railroad. So they got a C sticker, and that was unlimited amounts of gas. There was a lot of counterfeiting of that sticker. Any trucker got a T sticker, and he was also allowed unlimited amounts of gas. And then you kind of wonder who would get the X sticker, since it was very rare. Congressmen would get it, other VIPs would get that. This is right before the war, and people are just filling up anything they possibly can find at gas stations. They were hoarding gas, and bringing in wine bottles, 2 gallon wine bottles even. But so how would you like to dump your wine because you wanted that gas? So, there was a plumber that filled a couple of hot water tanks. But this is from Pittsburgh. Uh, First day of gas rationing, you probably had about twice as many people in public transit than you had the day before. This picture came off the internet. It's in Pittsburgh court, and this guy is arguing because he just got his sticker, his gas rationing taken away because he had gone to a ball game and they caught him. But there were courts, and you had to appeal why you shouldn't get your gas rationing taken away. Main Street of Scranton, Pennsylvania. There's not too many cars. There are some, but there's not too many. This is what gas rationing does. People start going back to the streetcars. Here's the line, the Ashley line in Wilkes-Barre. It's crossing the Jersey Central Railroad. And this was that return to trolley service. It was a perfect example. The line had been discontinued about 6 months prior to this picture, and was bust in August of 1941. There was a big argument that went on between the municipality and the trolley company about who's going to rip up track, who's going to pave. And all this time, the track stays, and the only thing that happens is Jersey Central Railroad rips up this crossing, and then along comes the Office of Defense Transportation. Oh, the track's still here. Well, you're going to put the trolleys back. And the Jersey Central was not happy because they had to do all the track construction they had just ripped up. And this line will eventually, after the war, go back to bus for a little bit and then become a trackless trolley line. Now, this is Scranton. All these buildings are gone except over on the left. That is the Jersey Central Freight Station. Tall building to the right of that was the peak of the Delaware and Hudson Railroad Station. And what was going on at this point was the Lackawanna Avenue Bridge was being rebuilt, and there was no provisions for tracks. It was partway there. So 6 lines were allowed to be abandoned in the city of Scranton because of that new bridge. A lot of these, Philadelphia printed a lot of this stuff. They had their own printing plant and it was a very prolific plant. So you'll see a lot of this stuff where the Office of Defense Transportation orders, literally orders, trolley routes to be changed and bus routes to be diverted and new bus routes to be installed to serve war industries down the bottom, direct service to the Navy Yard by lengthening routes 2 and routes 20. Now, Art Ellis just passed away. He was 104 years old, worked with me at the Port Authority, and he told me the story. He was planning to photograph a West Penn Railways trolley line that was being abandoned. And he had to get these permissions because there was a restriction on so many things all of a sudden, and cameras could be used for sabotage. And so he had to get permission from Resp got permission from the railways, then he got permission from the Navy, then he got permission from the War Department to take pictures of this line that was going to be abandoned. And these are some of the cars running out of Trafford. There's up on top is West Penn and a Pittsburgh Railways car, and you transferred. And this line went over the Pennsylvania Railroad, and Art told me that as much as he regretted it, he was afraid all of his pictures would be censored if he um, photographed that crossing because there was a railroad in it. And because the war effort was taking precedence, all of a sudden it became very difficult to get brand new transit vehicles. And that led us back to those old scrap vehicles. Buses and trolleys had been scrapped, and everything possible was being taken out of mothballs. Um, the ODT would decide who got new cars. And, as I said, 42. Pittsburgh wanted 200 cars, got 100. In 43, it only got 35 cars for the 100 that they ordered. And Pittsburgh tended to order cars in groups of 100. And this is one of the mills, probably down at Meston Machine, with the workers boarding the old cars. Here we go in the shops. The cars up top were all old passenger cars that have been converted into tow cars and in cars that were used to break up the heavy wet snow that was so typical in the East. And I was told they were dragged through the subways to get to the shops at 69th Street and at Frankfurt. They were repaired in the subway shops because the Kensington shop used for streetcars was so busy. Um, and here is the work. This they were doing 3 cars a day at one time in Kensington. This is one of the cars they had just modernized, 8510. But now all of a sudden they're going to rebuild 10 cars per week. And they do a lot of major repairs and inspections at Kensington as well. They traded cars sometimes. Above is a car sitting on the Red Arrow line, ran out of 69th Street, city boundary off into Delaware County. City of Philadelphia, the system there, Philadelphia Rapid Transit, and later Philadelphia Transportation Company, was able to give Red Arrow 3 of these cars, and you see them coming out of 69th Street down in the bottom. And Red Arrow bought them for $1,500 a piece and spent $15,000 a piece to rehabilitate them. They were all the same gauge, Philadelphia standard gauge, 5 foot 2.5 inches. So that wasn't a problem. Wilkesboro was the only Pennsylvania system that I could see that had some surplus stuff to sell. And this car is running under the Laurel line, the Lackawanna Wyoming Valley Railroad, the third rail electric line between Scranton and Wilkesboro. And they sold a bunch of older, heavier cars to San Diego and also some older cars and a plow to Sudbury, Ontario. And why were they surplus? Because beginning about 38, they started to install in Wilkesboro trackless trolleys. So they had extra cars left. And here are some of the extra cars sitting it out in the 1936 flood. And yep, Sudbury bought all these cars. And there's the big rotary plow that they also bought. railroad up on the right part of the Delaware and Hudson. It's called the Wilkesboro Connecting Railroad. And here's a shot of the Laurel line. It was third rail operated, except in Wilkesboro, where they compelled the line to use poles. And apparently, Wilkesboro was the place that most draftees had to go to for their physical and their swearing in ceremony and other induction processes. So the Laurel line, which was really hurting in the 30s, now they figure 1,000 men a month ride the cars. And this would be true in other systems that people would be riding the cars downtown because you have this gasoline rationing going on. Laurel line figured they probably carried about 50,000 people and they probably carried them back home afterwards as well. Now, you don't want this to happen during the war. You really don't want this to happen anyway. This was an ad that was done in Pittsburgh, and that's an actual Pittsburgh car that's all smashed up, and people get hurt, and cars are out of service. And that was the big deal. The cars were out of service. Certainly cost money as well. And the shops were running 24/7. So, did you really need to bring yet another accident car in? They put out films, they put out pieces of paper stressing safety, and it didn't always work. And we all have heard stories of Pittsburgh's bad air. It's not here anymore. Neither, of course, are most of the steel mills, but this occurred down in the Mon Valley along East 8th Avenue in Munhall, and there were plenty of steel mills here, and there was some kind of an inversion, fog, and the result was one car, the PCC, went into another. We had 36 injured, 4 dead, and 2 cars out of service for quite a few months. And I believe this was about 1943. Now, here are the old cars running with the PCCs, and you won't see this anywhere else. But in Pittsburgh, they tried to speed up the old cars. And yeah, they burned the motors out sometimes to do that, but it didn't matter. And as the PCCs came in, the older cars were able to keep up with the PCCs. And as a result, you could intermix these cars. And it was a much more flexible system to put cars out. And it was the only city that did that, though. We're down by the Hillman Library in the Oakland section of town, which is now almost all universities and hospitals, certainly no industries. This was the old bridge going between Dravosburg, the other side of the hill, and McKeesport, which was a major manufacturing and steel center. And if you look on the other side of that bridge, and I don't know that you can see my small pointer, but the tracks came across this part of the bridge, and then they had their own trestle to go on up the hill to the left. And this bridge, as you could tell, probably needed replacement. And now the sign is saying, we need to steel. You're going to have to put up with this for as long as it takes. There's the Laurel Line freight locomotive, 402. And 402 is based on 401, which was the first electric freight locomotive to run in the United States. They looked exactly the same. And here we are in Wilkesboro. And on the right is the Lehigh Valley, and they're the ones serving all of the industries here. And there was a crossing that needed replacement. The Lehigh Valley had the priority that an interurban line didn't have, so they got the crossing. Laurel Line crews put it in. Now, during the early years, everybody was afraid of an air raid. And Philadelphia, and I know Pittsburgh too, because I got both tickets, issued air raid tickets. And what happened is if you had an air raid or a drill, everybody got off the car because you got off the car and you already paid your fare. You had to get one of these. There's the Pittsburgh one on the bottom. Now, everybody could get off and hide except the operator because there was money on the car in the fare box. He was told that only if the bombs got close would you be able to get off the car and take shelter. Now, you get into 43, certainly 44, 45, and there's no risk at all. We try to tell people to go by trolley. The bottom is Bigelow Boulevard. And we're looking at downtown, and there's one of the signs that you would have put inside a streetcar. They're hoping you ride if you're going to town between 10 and 4 and after 6, because that's the rush hour. That's when everything is jammed. So they're promoting staggered work hours. Didn't really affect the fares very much. The Revenue Act in 43 imposed this 15% tax on any rides costing over 35 cents for a one-way ride. And this only affected travel in Pittsburgh on the lines, trolley lines to Washington and south to Canonsburg. And there were a few bus trips uh, in California to Nora were pretty far out. So in most cases, that did not affect things in Pennsylvania. Ah, doesn't that look comfortable? This was an experiment in Philadelphia with car 7056. How to get more people in the car. And they built the so called victory seats. They were plywood, basically, like a shelf. And you kind of, you sat stand. You kind of sit down, but you're not really sitting, and you're certainly not comfortable, and you brace your feet, and you grab a handrail that they put in the front and just grab on for dear life. And they hope this would work, and you can see on the left what it looked like. And these are all happy office employees, I'm sure, that were grabbed to take the picture. But most of the riders figured out real quick, we don't want to ride 7056, and it was a very short-lived experiment, and that car got reconverted back to its regular configuration. Um, Meanwhile, a lot of guys are being drafted now. Young employees are going. And the company in Philadelphia, I've never seen anything in Pittsburgh. I did see it out here on the West Penn line, which ran in the Coke region south of Pittsburgh, came up with a magazine called Off Peak. And the magazine was designed to talk about the employees, that what was happening in the company, who got married, who died, who got promoted, who had a baby. And on the other side, there were articles about the soldiers, the company employees that have become soldiers, sailors, airmen. And so everybody got a chance to read this. And of course, they would also advertise buying war bonds, they would advertise blood drives, and things like that. Here's the West Penn news that I mentioned. So, not nearly as elaborate, but certainly they were able to talk about their employees too that were off in the service. This was an extension of an employee magazine that was begun in 1917. And West Penn Railways not only ran streetcars, but they were in charge of the power company down there, and for a while were involved with water and gas. Believe it or not, Philadelphia never had a patriotic car. I've never seen a picture of one, but other systems did. And up above to the left was the Lehigh Valley Transit. The car up on the right, upper right, Altoona. Um, there's a Johnstown car, 1944 War Fund car on the lower right, and Scranton's very popular red, white, and blue 505 down on the lower left. By the way, 505, the only surviving electromobile, and that is now in the process of rehabilitation in Scranton by the Electric City Trolley Museum. And here's a color shot. This showed up on eBay. And believe it or not, nobody purchased this. And so I got a hold of it, and that gives you a really good idea of what it looks like. The West Penn had their own, not nearly as fancy. Now, Pittsburgh went overboard. They probably had about 20 to 24 cars with all sorts of patriotic ads on it. There are a few of them. They operated them on the crosstown line, which ran from downtown across the Allegheny River over into the north side. And they figured on that line, there were so many people there shopping and doing other things that here are all the different pictures that more people would see Route 22 cars than on anywhere else in the city. And so we've got blood drives and WAC recruiting and Marine recruiting, buying war bonds, join the Navy. Here's a color shot. A few of these still exist. That's the Allegheny General Hospital in the back. All beautiful shots, usually the same place. Sun was very good. So, And I've never seen a color shot of this. 28th Division, though, was a National Guard unit in Pennsylvania that was very early on federalized, and it fought in Europe the entire time. One of the first units to get into Germany was the 28th Division. It saw battle fighting in the Battle of the Bulge and in the Hurtgen Forest. I always thought this was neat. Growing up in Scranton, where we all lived in our own neighborhoods, and Roman Catholics didn't like Eastern Orthodox, and Irish didn't like Ukrainians. There was a whole bunch of that went on out there. But apparently, the company painted up this car for the nationality groups, and all these women were in their ethnic costumes, all working together um, to sell bonds. Manpower needs. Boy, that's going to be a problem. You need everybody in the factories, but yet the draft took almost 10% of the system's workers in Philadelphia. Don't forget, a lot of these guys have been running trolleys since the 20s and sometimes earlier. But it still became imperative to bring in the women. And in 1943 in Philadelphia, that's what was happening. And this young lady is talking to two other women, and there's a bus that is going out in the neighborhoods. So they can actually have you sign up to be an operator or to work in maintenance. Pretty good wages, I guess. But you have to realize other factories were also paying higher wages. Wages had been frozen in 1942. And this is where perks start to come in. You get vacation, you get some health care, you get things that aren't frozen. And still, other factories had been paying more, and the company has to compete to bring in workers. This is done by the Philadelphia company. I told you they had a very large and prolific printing plant, and these ads are telling you, boy, what a wonderful job! Won't you be my motorman? It's exciting. We need help. And in Philadelphia, because of the historic nature of the town, these women were called the Molly Pitchers. And anybody that doesn't know their Revolutionary War history, during the Battle of Monmouth, Molly Pitcher was a woman whose husband was serving an artillery piece, and he either was hurt by our other artillery or musket fire, or he may have collapsed from the heat. More people at the Battle of Monmouth died of heat stroke than they did of actual combat wounds. But allegedly, Molly Pitcher was supposed to have picked up the ramrod and helped serve the gun. And I'm sure she helped serve the gun, but she probably did was move ammunition to the gun from the caisson, which was probably 150 feet back from the gun. That way, if the ammunition exploded, the gun won't explode. Here are some of the Pittsburgh women. They were called by the public trolley dollies. And there's Mildred Hulko, who was our first motor woman. There was a lot of, she only died about 10 years ago. There was a lot of stories, good stories about her. This is the first woman to run trolleys in Philadelphia. Margaret Rock, I think was her name. They had a class of about 9 or 10 to begin with. And again, Philadelphia advertised, there's the bus where you could go in and sign up, went through all the different neighborhoods of Philadelphia. They made the job exciting. I wouldn't swap it for any job. And actually, many women who did very well. They liked working with the public. They were very good. Although later on, they got away from all the hype about how wonderful it was, and they used a very standard picture, as you can see, saying that really was important to get people to their job. She was really part of the production effort. There was always a shortage. People, the companies were looking for both men and women. They hired older men. They brought back older operators in some cases. And yes, they had a train. So here's Pittsburgh in 1944. 5 women became part of the very first class. And the training was similar in both Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. They assumed, the companies assumed that most women never had a chance to drive, and that was probably true. So the first day, definitely in Philadelphia, they let them drive a car for the entire day just to get that idea. And again, as the women turned in or became operators, they showed that they did better, made much better operators than their male counterparts. These are Red Arrow ladies. This was in Philadelphia. And here was their basic classroom instruction. And they had to learn how the trolley ran. How did it operate? In Philadelphia, they spent an afternoon in a conductor's booth because many of these lines were two-person lines, and they had to practice the collection and registration of fares. And they had to get familiar with all the different paperwork. They had to learn about the parts of the streetcar. So we're learning about a controller, you know, how to go through the wire frogs, the overhead wire frogs. Why, what happens if you improperly operate the car? You burn out the fingers in these hand controllers. These aren't pedal cars. They learned on not on PCC cars, but on old standard equipment. So you had to learn how to run this. And then there were all the fun things to do outside, turning a switch on the left with a switch iron or a metal bar. They gave them six days of instruction. Now I operate streetcars at the Trolley Museum, and let me tell you, pulling that rope down on some of those cars can be pretty hard. Spring loaded. There is a woman who's turned in, Dorothy Redden. I think that's who that is, and you can see she's in a regular uniform. They had a different shoulder patch than the men did and a different cap, a little something more feminine. But they loved the job. So now, not all the women became operators or conductors. I had to go into the shops. And initially, even before the war, women were in the shops, they were cleaning people. Now, yeah, they're polishing the car up, and these women at least are still doing that time of work because the car has just been rebuilt. It's a double-ended car, 5313, but other women are going to be in there dismantling compressors and winding armatures and fixing controllers. And so they're doing all this work, and they would do that in Pittsburgh as well. And they didn't want the typical cruise room, which, usually was, at least when I was at Port Authority, was smoky and ping pong tables and cards going on. They had their own area, and I'm sure they had to get their own restroom facilities. And it was a little bit more feminine, a little bit more homey than what the guys used. Here's an ad for, at this point, of course, new PCCs, and they're called victory vehicles. Everything now is pointed towards getting people excited, or getting at least people behind the war effort, and showing you how plants need to get workers via public transportation. How important these new cars are. Even though a lot of the fleets of some of the bigger systems like Philly and Pittsburgh were composed of a lot of standard equipment. Here we are at the mill on Second Ave, or I'm sorry, East 8th Avenue. That's the wall of the old mill background above the automobiles. This was the mill that had the Homestead Steel strike, where the Pinkertons were fired upon by striking workers, and eventually the military had to take over. Up at Neville Island. Neville Island was a place where they made LSTs, the landing ships. There are still steel and chemicals and a variety of factories on that island. So here's a crowd there, and they ran from the shift changes. These cars ran directly from Neville Island to various neighborhoods with no stops. One operator told me that the guys were smoking, they were playing cards, they knew nobody else was going to get on. And once in a while, the guy, one of our operators I talked to when I was younger, said there was even some fornication going on those cars. So they were special cars. And after a hard 12 hours of work, nobody was going to interfere. Here's the Westinghouse plant in the back. The Union Railroad Bridge is right up above the streetcar Westinghouse Air Brake was down here. East Pittsburgh Works was down here. So we're seeing the crowds getting on the cars. West Penn, that was south of here. Fayette, Westmoreland counties. Some of the old Beehive coke ovens had reopened. There were coal mines down there. Many of them had reopened. And the West Penn served all of that, connecting into towns like Greensburg, Connellsville, Brownsville, and Uniontown. Um, that's about as fancy beside the Red Cross car that Johnstown ever got. But I found this in our archive when I was going to look for something else. And that was their ad. They wanted bus operators and trolley operators, both men and women. And of course, Johnstown had Bethlehem Steel and a lot of coal mines and plenty of railroad activity for the cars, to carry those people. It's Altoona. Altoona and Scranton were owned by the same company. So Scranton had the same cars. And they were near the main shops in Altoona. So they served the main shops. The people, of course, repairing locomotive, steam locomotives, diesels. Here's the laboratory, the test building that they had in Altoona. I think that building may still be there, but I haven't been in Altoona for many, many years. Reading. Now, I don't know what kind of a steam engine that is. It's certainly blocking the streetcar. But Reading was interesting because I never realized Reading had garment and textile mills, and I didn't know the Beryllium Corporation were there. And so they had a special copper alloy that they used to manufacture aircraft parts there. Another Reading car, just to give you an idea what the cars look like. Lancaster. Lancaster had a lot of Bernies. They had some suburban lines that did run out beyond the city limits, and they used larger cars. We think we may see one later. But a lot of their city service at this time, they had bought these Bernie cars, much smaller cars that could be operated by one man. Now, they made crystals for the Air Force radios. This was also a place with a lot of agriculture surrounding it. Apparently, belladonna, which I never heard about, and I'm a World War II buff. They needed that plant. It was grown there as an emergency drug and is surgery. It was an anesthetic and a paralyzing agent, and I didn't know that. Here's a Hershey car. There's the typical side of the road operation. During the 30s, that operation would demise as a state, particularly the state, wanted to widen the road or make it multi-lane more than just the two. And of course, they would force the trolley to leave that right away. Hershey, though, you think of chocolate bars. All the World War II movies have chocolate bars, and John Kennedy in PT 109 is bringing boxes of chocolate bars. How they never melted in the Pacific, I don't know. But over in the Hershey plant, they were also making the ration bars, the D ration bars, the high protein bars. And at one point, the bars, the Army told them, look, these guys really like this. Don't make it tasty. But it gave them enough energy, even though it may not have filled you up, to keep you going. Allentown. Probably the Lehigh Valley, serving the mill, the Bethlehem Mill at Allentown and in Bethlehem. But LVT served a lot of plants, and they certainly served the major steel mills that were located here. Reading, I think that's a G3. And the Lehigh Valley Transit moved between Allentown, Bethlehem, and the transit in Philadelphia, and many times they paralleled the Reading Railroad. Here's the red arrow. This is Westchester Pike. Today it's 5 or 6 lanes wide. They owned the right of way, of course, on the left, and they would be able to bring a lot of people in from places like Chester and Media and Ardmore and Sharon Hill into the subway at 69th Street so people could get to work in downtown or head over to the Delaware River for the shipyards. The company's business goes up 50% between 41 and 42, the opening stages of the war. It doubles again in 1943. It's going to carry, let me look at that, 41.7 million people by 1945. Philadelphia, we're over on Delaware Avenue. Cramp Shipyard, I believe, is the near sides that were first introduced in 1913. And all the industries had crowds that looked like that. That's the Bud Company. And we're over here on Erie Avenue, end of the line on Erie Avenue. And there's 2054, which would run in Philly in the 80s. It was painted up in its original delivery color of silver and cream and blue, and it is now in Philadelphia or in Scranton, hopefully awaiting restoration. You can see a mix of buses and old and new streetcars. They dragged those orange cars that we saw earlier back out of service, about 20 or 25 of them, and they created two-car trains. These cars initially had couplers on both ends anyway. They reinstalled the couplers to make up these two-car trains, and they had some very special routes. This was the Navy Yard to the Quartermaster Depot. What do you say about Wilkesboro? Beside, hey, there's the Laurel line, and that's one of my favorite lines. And there was the Prospect Breaker, and these big coal breakers used to resize coal for ovens, coal furnaces were all over the place. But you had industry up here too, primarily anthracite coal was being mined, and that was still a major, major heating fuel. And of course, gas and oil was going to other places. It was somewhat in short supply. The garment industry was very heavily entrenched up here, and there were other various different industries, like even the button works. And buttons, of course, important for uniform. Were across the street from the Frankfurt Arsenal. There's one of those small buses. And look at the size of a streetcar versus a bus, and you can sort of see you really have to pack them on a bus if you can't introduce any other equipment. And routine maintenance can't be performed. Of course, they're out there 24/7, just kind of patch them up and go. It's going to cause a lot of wear and tear. This was the overcrowding that was very common. This is a safety zone, and it's not even a concrete island with a chain around it. And people have to be very careful of the traffic out here. It's about 1942. The car's in its silver delivery scheme, and now we're going to come to a very interesting part because the war um, is really going to, raise the status of black employees. Partly there was a labor shortage, and these were an untapped resource, but the government also had taken various steps. They banned any race-specific job listings. They wouldn't certify unions if the union didn't allow minority participation. That wasn't true, though, with transit companies. And Philadelphia was one of those companies that, yeah, we had about 500 or 600 workers that were black, and they were all doing dirty jobs. I've seen them in pictures, stacking up greasy ties, and they do track work at times. And Philadelphia, even though there were protests um, to get onto the platform where the job was better, the job was cleaner, they just wouldn't allow the black employees to operate. You could be a porter. That was what they were saying. Now, it's March 1944, and the union within the company, within Philadelphia Transportation, was the remnants of the old company union, which transit workers thought were in bed with the company. I believe they were. So they voted in the Transit Workers Union, the TWU, and the TWU had very quietly said, yeah, there will be racial equality when we start negotiations. Um, they haven't started negotiations when the old contract expires. Don't forget, it's illegal to strike during the war, and the track these talks are dragging on. There's something called the Federal Fair Employment Practice Committee. They're pushing the company to integrate its workforce. The TWU hasn't really approved a contract yet, and there's a lot of pressure from the outside to do this. And finally, in July, the War Manpower Commission says to PTC, you're going to abide by the employment policies of the United States government. They prohibit this type of hiring discrimination, and you're going to start the training of black workers. And so, yep, July 7th, 44, they bring in eight black workers from within the company and they begin their training. And this is one of these famous pictures that, show up in the paper. Thomas Allen, I think. Here's
George,
loser info.
George, we're we're
Yes.
we're at almost we're at our ending point, so you take a few moments and kind of wrap up.
Well, let
Thanks.
me try to do that. Okay. I'll move fast, but after this one, it'll move very fast. But the strike's very important if we can do that because they turn in and there's a strike. Here's all the striking the workers go off. They're all sick. It's August 1st, 1944. And later, union representatives say, you know what? It's really all about black workers. You got to get them off. Um, and everybody's trying to get to work on that day and the day after. And of course, all the pictures show pretty girls. Um, the Navy runs its own buses. Nobody stops them. Otherwise, you have all this makeshift work here. Ice cream trucks must have been kind of chilly in there. I feel sorry for that poor woman. And of course, the publicity photo that we all walked and we're tired. And it's all August 1st. And the military is pleading with people to come back. We need the bullets to be made. We need steam locomotives to be repaired. And Roosevelt very quickly has enough. And he orders Major General Philip Hayes to take over the system. And Hayes brings in on August 3rd 5,000 troops. And we're still fighting in Normandy in August. They were destined to combat. Not now. They take over the system. They post signs in the cars. Don't interfere with me. They take down the Union flag and put their own up. And look how patriotic people were. They salute, even though it's now the military flag. But these guys move in. They're totally dressed for combat. They take over facilities. Luzerne Car House on the top. Down here at Woodland Car House on the bottom with a BAR. They are ordered to ride with fixed bayonets, although they don't have this one for the picture. Um, Usually 2 or 3 men to a car. Jeeps are all over the city to make sure that nobody is interfering. And I will love this picture because the sister is getting on. I think she's 11. Guy's about 5 or 6, and he's got his, tin pot and his gun, and he's helping the soldier. Uh, People were real happy. There had been some intermittent rioting in different places. With the military there, they knew they were all safe. Nothing bad was going to happen. They were out there giving bag lunches to soldiers. You notice the cigarette back in those days before we weren't allowed to show them. And 1944. By now, you'd never know gasoline rationing even existed. And I really don't believe rationing was a very big deal at this point. There's another look at all the streetcars serving the industries on Lehigh Avenue. Look at all the automobiles in 1944. So, of course, VE Day, Victory in Europe Day is May 8th, 1945. We're still fighting in the Pacific. That ends August 15th, 1945. Here's some of the celebrations in Philadelphia. Here's the homemade beer distribution down there in the neighborhoods, and everybody's happy. The women aren't, because many of these systems where the women were not unionized were asked to leave. Men were coming back. Okay, you're going to leave. Not in Pittsburgh or Philadelphia. They had permanent jobs. And in fact, when I started at the Port Authority, there were still 3, what was known as war wagons, still working here. But the messages show up as different messages. Now, we're going to hire the vets, right? Now we need to hire the physically handicapped because a lot of vets are coming back and they don't have all the parts they left with. They still want a job. Philadelphia, the only system that plans for their workers to come back, they develop a way to reintegrate the workers into the system. Meanwhile, the day after victory in Japan Day, all restrictions are lifted. You can do whatever route planning you want. There's a lot of changes. The GI Bill goes into effect, and I wonder a few of these young guys may have been combat veterans taking advantage of the GI Bill. It's 47 in Pittsburgh. So they're riding to college, as you can see. Here's Philadelphia. Cars, horse and wagon, streetcar. Um, Everybody comes back and relicenses their old car. And 1942 cars design are being made. And now the streetcars are fighting for their life again. People are back to driving. This is downtown McKeesport. You can see this guy's pretty stuck. Look at the car on the right. He's trying to get around things. Very narrow roads. These wider trolleys operating on a very narrow roads. Hey, no more wage and price controls. Well, no more strike bans either. And transit was just one of many industries that struck for pay increases. And I love this shot. First time our husbands are right. Some of you may know what we feel like here, but the wives were out there too because they had suffered throughout the war as well. And here we are in Lancaster. Welcome home, our heroes. That's one of the older, heavier cars that we're running, and it's worn out. It's built about 1915. These cars are all worn out from after the war. Look at the old buses that are there, and these things are coming up. Beautiful, different colors, fins, chrome. And you also have something developing called National City Lines, and it's a national bus operation. GM has a stake in it, Standard Oil, some concrete companies. And so the scrapping of streetcars begins again. And yeah, the camel sign does blow smoke. This is 1949. In Pittsburgh during the war, the Guggenheims bought up all the stock and then sued the company for something and wound up with all the cash. So then, yep, Pittsburgh Railway's got to fight for its life. Fare box only. Here's some of the old equipment. Look at that track on one side of the bridge. Don't forget the car goes both ways. And a lot of more automobiles coming. The car is worn out. It's going to be scrapped. So here's during the 30s. This is what's left. 1948. Not much. Johnstown, Altoona. Here's the abandonment dates. And since we're recording it, you can probably take a look at it on that. But between 46 and 54, everything but Johnstown abandons its streetcars. Johnstown goes in 1960. And, if you want to go from left to right, there's Allentown with the bus replacement. There's the orange West Penn car. If you come around, there's Wilkesboro on the right. That's a trackless trolley. They would go with trackless trolley till 1958. There's Altoona, which looks exactly like a Scranton car because there's dual ownership. And here's 401, the original freight line. The Laurel Line is going to abandon service in December of 1952. The electric freight will continue to run until August 19th, 1953. But everybody's going to places like American Autos. Everybody's driving. Here's Scranton, the original system. It started it all. This appears on December 18th, 1954. There it is. The same line that started was the last line in the city to be abandoned. And all the cars are burned. You burn them because everything burnable leaves nothing but scrap metal. One of these cars has survived, and it is now in the process of reconstruction. This is mostly what happens. Pittsburgh on the top, Lancaster on the bottom.
Okay, I think we're going to stop it here at this point.
Well,
And
there's Johnstown. Yeah, this is the end.
okay,
This is the junk. See what's happened in the 60s? The streetcars go bad. We have the energy crisis. This is Pittsburgh and abandonment. But you have the energy crisis. And if you all remember that, the planners took a look at light rail again, at streetcars, now being called light rail. And so this is what's running in Philly. This is the new system in Pittsburgh.
okay, great.
There
Thank
we
you.
go.
Well, thank you, George. One of the things I want to do, Christian Fredrickson is also on the line with us tonight,
Oh,
and I do want
hi,
to give
Kristen.
her just a moment to, while we are getting questions into the chat box, I'd like to Christian to just tell you a little bit about the museum and what other things you can see at the museum. Over to you, Kristen.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Anne, and thank you, George, for another great presentation. At the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, we're located in Washington, PA, which is about a 4-hour drive, I believe, from Washington, D.C. And we've got over 50 cars now, about 53 in our collection. We've got a 4 mile round trip. And last year we had 48,000 visitors. So everybody should come out if they get the chance. We have at least a couple dozen cars that run, and about 12 or 13 of them are in regular service. So if you've been to the museum before, chances are something new will be running next time you visit. And we just opened a brand new 21,000 square foot Welcome and Education Center in November of 2023. Brand new building, all new exhibits. In fact, we just got 5 delivered last week. They're still coming in. It's very exciting. We're in a big period of growth right now. So invite everybody to come join us. And if you can't travel that far, I also highly recommend the National Capital Trolley Museum and the Baltimore Streetcar Museum closer to your neck of the woods.
Thanks, Kristen. That's really wonderful. Well, I hope, George, that you're looking at the chat. You've got a lot of great
I have to
comments
get
coming
through.
in.
I have to get through the chat yet.
Okay,
I'll
no,
be here for as long as you would like me to be for questions or for comments.
well, we don't really have any more questions. I just want to let everyone know that this was a lot of information, and thank you so much. I was really happy to hear about all of the different socioeconomic activities going on with the trolleys as well as the trolleys themselves. And you answered one question I had, which was the car repair shops and whether during the war effort, women participated in the car repair shops and they participated in several different ways. So just wanted to let everybody know that all of these meetings are recorded and we will be loading them up to the DC NRHS YouTube channel. And so if you want to see this version again or any of our other active sessions, please take a look at our YouTube channel. And with that, I'm going to say goodnight to everybody. Happy Valentine's Day once again.
And can I say that too, that me and a number of other people have done programs for something called Trolleyology here at the museum, and they're on our YouTube channel. Excuse me, which you can access by going to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum website, then going under education. And I think it's down on the bottom. You'll see some weird name called Trolleyology. And if you click on that, there'll be plenty of streetcar shows.
Great.
Different systems on different aspects of the industry that your members might be interested in.
Wonderful. Thanks for that advice. George, thank you so much for a
Oh, you're very
wonderful
welcome.
show.
I'm very happy to do this.
Oh,
Thank you for having me.
it was wonderful. Good night, everybody.